This is not a traditional synagogue. This is an old school that we've converted. But there are always signs that you are in a synagogue. And some of those signs are around us now. So first of all, you have a light, an everlasting light called a Ner Tamid, which is symbolic of the temple, the original temple in Jerusalem. And so the temple light is lit continuously. And if you know Hanukkah story, that's about the light being extinguished and a miracle that it continued to light for 8 days. So we have a light in our synagogue. On the wall over there, we have the 10 Commandments, which are the most important commandments, important rules in Judaism. And we also have a tree of life, which we've got two. We've got one here, and we've got one on a stained glass window, which is closed at the moment. You can see that there, with a dove, Star of David, 10 Commandments. And again, sort of the tree of life is very symbolic for us. It's about birth, life, and death. On our tree of life, we mark important family events, so births, bar mitzvahs, weddings, and the passing of people we wish to remember. And it's very interesting because that tree of life, the branches at the bottom spell out the word shalom, which is peace in Hebrew.
First of all, I'd like to thank Neve Shalom Synagogue, Leon and his congregation and team for allowing us again to use their wonderful venue for our Council of Faiths meetings and events. It's truly appreciated, as well as your hospitality. And my name is Fayaz Suleiman. For those that don't know me, I'm the chairman of the Leicester Council of Faiths. And today we have our open meeting that we host every couple of months as our format of engaging with faith issues as well as faith communities. I have on my right Bharti Acharya, who's on the board and treasurer of the Council of Faiths. I have Manish Sood, who's the son of late Manjula Sood, and Narendra Vaghela, vice chair of the Leicester Council of Faiths, Yasmin Surti, who's the secretary of the Leicester Council of Faiths, as well as many other board members that are present here today. As it is customary that we, at the beginning of each event, we hold a moment of reflection. And given the passing of late Manjula Sood, we felt that it will be very fitting for us to dedicate this particular open meeting and open event as a tribute to her, but also as part of the reflection for me to say a few words of tribute on behalf of the Leicester Council of Faiths. As you know, that the topic for today after the tribute is Sister Dying in Faith, and we have some wonderful speakers lined up today as well to talk about this very interesting issue and subject with different perspectives. So I do hope that you can stay for the rest of the evening after the tribute is done. So I'll start by doing the tribute. As we gather here today, we dedicate this open meeting to the late Manjula Sood as a tribute. And as it is customary, a moment of reflection that we hold at the beginning of each Council of Faith meeting, I will also ask you to hold a moment of silence and reflection for Manjula Sood, please. Thank you very much. So Manjula was, as we know, was a very special person that touched the hearts of many people in different ways. I first met Manjula in 2004, and this was after I participated in the European Parliament elections as a candidate and secured a good percentage of the vote in Leicester, not enough to be elected, but I met her after that, and she had never met me before, was very congratulatory and very supportive of the work that I was doing to represent different communities. And she used to ask advice of me about community sentiment, and at the same time she used to give me encouragement to say, you need to be more active, be involved in different political spheres in the city and the county. but life in politics is not something that was suited for me at the time due to family commitments. But she was a senior figure in the local political governance herself of the city, and she carried various portfolios, not least, the lead for community cohesion in the city council, and also having roles such as the Lord Mayor. We have already heard how she became the city's first female Hindu councillor in October 1996, after winning a by-election triggered by her husband Paul's death earlier that year. And in May 2008, she became the UK's and Leicester's first Asian female Lord Mayor. She was appointed an MBE during her time as Lord Mayor and awarded an honorary doctorate of laws from the University of Leicester. So apart from her accolades, on her personality, she was a people's person, generous with her praise of people who did community work and encouraging them to continue their good work. Not only that, she was also generous with her praise and encouragement of people in public life, and we've heard tributes from the likes of the former Chief Constable and many other ex-councillors and other colleagues of hers, how she was encouraging them and being a very positive role model. As I said, she was politically minded, but married the political life with community life and her family life. But for us as faith representatives, she will be remembered for her chairmanship of the Leicester Council of Faiths for 8 years, that's 4 terms. And we know that from her role as City Mayor's advisor and as Lord Mayor, she always gave her time to various projects, events and public meetings. She met the challenges of the chair of the Leicester Council of Faiths as well by attending numerous events representing the faith communities. And as chair, I know how difficult it is to commit yourself to attending so many different events, each seemingly important, each seemingly, something that you want to support, because every community has something very valuable that they undertake in terms of events and celebrations. So I initially served as a secretary for 2 years during her term as the chair and 6 years as her vice chair, and she supported all the changes that we introduced to open up the Leicester Council of Faiths in terms of its membership. So she was very supportive of the work and the ideas and the program of change that we had introduced in the Council of Faiths. And any events that we suggested, she was very supportive of that. And she would always go out of her way suggesting speakers or suggesting, how we can actually undertake that event. And that time she would give good advice around, for example, statements that we issued, public statements, where some wording might be seen to be misinterpreted by somebody if it's read in a different light. And therefore, giving that wisdom and wise guidance and counsel. So even after her chairmanship, she remained on the board for several years, and we were very pleased to appoint her as one of our few life honorary members. And there's not that many life honorary members of the Council of Faiths appointed or even left. We only have Smita Shah, we have Solomon Nagli who's here today, we have Rachel Singh Sandhu, and we had her. As well as that, we've got Father John Lally as well. So we can see that in terms of the life honorary membership of the Council of Faiths, this is a recognition of the contribution made by a person to the work of interfaith, to the work of bringing communities together, and the work of the Council of Faiths, which plays a pivotal role in not just representing faith communities and the interests of faith communities, but also providing a platform for dialogue and interaction, for example, with events like these. So she was one of the regular attendees at events of the Council of Faiths, even after her chairmanship. And even, for example, at this very synagogue, we held an event on faith healers. And I remember that she, dutifully arrived on time, and with Manish, and he was here as well, her son. And she's always keen to contribute and participate. And the topic, I think, was faith healers here that we had at the very synagogue. And everywhere she would go, she would talk about the work of the Council of Faiths. And even after her chairmanship, she will still talk about the Council of Faiths and how she's involved in the Council of Faiths, and always try to sort of champion the work that the Council of Faiths is doing. And also, the Council of Faiths was also deeply ingrained in her as well. That was part of her own fabric as well. On a personal note, I would like to echo her tributes from people of faith and non-faith that are given to her. She was a kind-hearted person, and she always put a smile on others, and she always gave time to others, and she always respected people of all communities. For example, conveying greetings on festivals during the different faith community days that are held throughout the year, where she would be one of the first to actually convey those greetings on the Leicester Council of Faiths WhatsApp group. And so, in essence, that she was a very likable person because she did not hold any agendas. Whoever she met, she actually conveyed her genuine, sincere guidance, support, advice, and he always encouraged everybody that she met. And that is something that will be missed by all of us. So her service to the community, her consideration of others, and her dedication to community cohesion will be dearly missed and will remain as her legacy. I would like to also pay tribute to her sons and grandchildren and relatives. She used to often talk about them with pride. And Manish, who's here, who I've known for many years, has been at her side for many years, and being a pillar for his mum and helping his mum in her service to the community. So you should be proud of yourselves, that you supported her, and you should be proud, of Manjula ji, as we are proud to have her in our lives and in the Council of Faiths. So we will remember her in our hearts, and her place in the Council of Faith has been cemented for future generations. So may her soul rest in peace, and we pray that the Almighty God, that the family and the friends develop patience and strength to cope with their loss. Amen. Thank you. If I can ask Manish to say a few words of tribute as well.
Dear respected brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, all civic dignitaries, friends, and my late mother. I'm so grateful for all the lovely contributions and tributes that everyone has mentioned this evening and in the past as well at various events about my wonderful mother and her dynamic services to the community. She was always so proud to serve on the Leicester Council of Faiths and was so honoured humbly when she became a life member for the Leicester Council of Faiths. I used to really enjoy taking her to various Leicester Council of Faiths meetings and events and observe her innovative strategic stamina during the meetings. She was very much a people's person and always supported and listened to all members from the Leicester Council of Faiths. I remember going to the High Cross in Leicester City Centre to help provide support and honour the well-respected international emblem for the Leicester Council of Faiths. To the wider diverse communities in the city, she always tried to put people before herself and treated everyone with care, love and respect. For me, she wasn't just a mum, but a Mother Teresa, a Mother UK, a Mother Global World. She had a powerful, abhorrent, spiritual and intelligent mind, like a computer and robot. She could also remember not everyone's birthday, but also everyone's names and other details from the miscellaneous times of various meetings and dates without having a diary. My mother always put the Leicester Council of Faiths proudly first in all walks of her life and was never frightened to challenge the system for diverse, equal justice. My mum was a freedom fighter and will always be remembered in history with many other community leaders. But most importantly though, it's every single one of you in this room, in this synagogue today, who has helped my late mother achieve her true aims, wishes and dreams for the Leicester Council of Faiths. My late mother was where she was due to all your collective, collaborative, hard work and love that you always gave her. Thank you to everyone who is present today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you to you, the Leicester Council of Faiths, for hosting this habitual event for my lovely missed dear mother. Thank you to the City of Leicester, the nation, the UK, and all global nations for peacefully and humbly bringing us all together on this historic occasion for the Leicester Council of Faiths. Thank you no end, coherently, from myself and sadly my family in London who couldn't be here today, present today, to attend this event. Once again, thank you to all of you. And I will finish with the words that my mum always loved and encouraged me to use to move forward in my life. From the late Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of America in the USA in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, that, beta, my son, if you have hope, then you can do anything in life, because the only thing you have to fear is the fear itself. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Manish, for that. And I hope that you can join us once again to pay tribute to late Manjula Sood and also Manish and the family. And we hope and pray that that connection continues and your engagement and connection with us continues going forward as well. As I said, that I'm sure there's many people here in this room that would want to pay tribute personally and say many things, but there is a lot of opportunity for that to happen, and I'm sure her minds are, their minds are full and of the thoughts of your mom and what you had brought to them and also to their communities as well as to the city itself. And at the same time, our hearts and minds and thoughts are also with yourselves and your family as well at this difficult time. So once again, thank you very much for accepting the invitation to come and speak and also be part of this tribute. And as I said, we look forward to working with you. And we are here, at any time you want us, just pick up the phone. We are one family, at the end of the day. So let us continue that spirit and the legacy. And again, in the same spirit that Manjula was promoting around togetherness, that we are all one human family. Let's all of us work, in that legacy. Let's all of us continue to promote that in all spheres of our work as well. So thank you very much for that. We're now going to move on to the next part of today's evening. Okay. If anybody wants, before they go, if they want to lay a flower, just has in the tray on behalf of Manjula Sood. There are condolence books. There's a condolence books as well, so please help yourself before you leave to do that as well. And thank you for arranging that. Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on to the next part of today's evening, this evening's event. And that is about the topic of assisted dying. What I'm going to do is, in terms of the format, we have several speakers who have kindly agreed to speak today on this subject. We have Suleiman Nagdi, who is, I'm sure, very well known to everybody here in the room. We've got Cllr as well, also very well known in the room. Bharti is also going to speak, and also Leon, who welcomed us to the synagogue today. Each one will be sharing different perspectives, and assisted dying is something that, it's one of those sub-subjects which are, it's not an easy subject to deal with. When it comes to faith communities, we know that there's a lot of debate, discussion nationally, but also locally, also within faith communities around how to respond to the assisted dying bill. We know in terms of the context that the bill has been passed, but it's in the Lords, House of Lords, for scrutiny. And I'll be just sharing some few points about the bill itself and what the features are. But I thought it would be useful just to read one or two paragraphs that people have contributed. Some faith communities, or some people generally, have have fears of how this could be implemented, about how the focus can change from life to taking the option of death, and some people, rather than seeing that assisted dying is the last resort, they might take that as a duty to die rather than a requirement because of the circumstances that they may face. At the same time, there are also people who have expressed, articulated the issues around assisted dying and how it impacts them and through experiences they've lived, and also their family members that have lived through, about the pain and suffering that they go through, and the fact that they want to have the choice to be able to limit that suffering or eliminate that suffering and pain. And there's arguments also about the palliative care, that actually the focus should be on supporting people to relieve their pain and distress. So there's different arguments, different perspectives. There's a lot of emotion involved, and obviously when we hear in the debates about the examples of how assisted dying can help people alleviate suffering and pain, we also hear about how people have fears that there will come a time where unnecessary deaths may occur because when something and some people have fear that it is money driven, that the NHS in order to cut costs and the social care element and anything further care element, the terminal illness, for example, end of life care, that this is a means for them to cut costs, because then people will choose to take the easier way out. So these are different arguments presented by different groups and different perspectives, and I think in terms of different faith communities, we learn about it today from their perspective, and hopefully we'll get a balanced view of somebody who's supporting it and also somebody who's against it, but also somebody who may not be both, either one. But I think it's an opportunity for us to have the presentations, and then after that there'll be an open discussion, question and answers with the panel. So I hope this will be a very interesting discussion. Just in terms of the context, some of the elements of the assisted dying bill is that there is an eligibility criteria. And the eligibility criteria is that they have to be adults, 18 and over, who are terminally ill with a prognosis of 6 months or fewer to live. And they have a decision-making capacity under the Mental Capacity Act 2005. And they are ordinarily resident in England and Wales at least for 12 months and registered with the GP. And the eligibility excludes individuals whose prognosis is based solely on disability, mental illness, or voluntary starvation. And the process, they must provide 2 separate written declarations expressing the wish to die. 2 independent doctors must confirm terminal diagnosis, capacity, voluntariness, and absence of coercion, with at least 1 week between assessments, and a multidisciplinary review panel comprising of senior legal professional or judge, psychiatrist, social worker assessing the case. And there is some institutional oversight as well. The Commons approval third reading was passed House of Commons by a narrow margin on the 20th of June 2025, and the next stage is now awaiting detailed consideration by the House of Lords, with ongoing amendments and debates expected. But because of the number of amendments that have been proposed, there's a possibility that that the bill could be rushed through, or it might be that it might be delayed further. So there's some of the context in terms of the bill itself. I'm not going to sort of steal the thunder of the speakers.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, my name is Bharti, and this something that we're talking about. Unfortunately, the Eastern religions have had a lot less input into this bill from my research than anybody else. And I think the reason for that is probably, well, I can only give you my perspective, but it's probably because it believes in karmas, which is basically your actions And those actions actually lead you to where you are supposed to be going on your journey. Now, this bill, it would be an interference with the life that is supposed to be your journey, individual's journey. So the first thing is that it's like it's pointless in a way to actually give your point of view when each and every person from any of the Eastern religion will have a different perspective. Saying that, our scriptures do actually very clearly does point out when it is permitted to actually have assisted dying, and when it is absolutely a no-no. There is a grey area as well, and this is the actual foundation or the vastness of Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, because it does not give you just one way. It gives you a lot of different ways depending on the time, the situation that particular person and the family is going through at that point. So karma is basically your actions, but it's not just the actions, but it's the intention. So what your intention is. So for example, I could have a knife in my hand and people will think, oh, right, she's going to come and kill. But on the other hand, it could be a chef who would be actually chopping vegetables. Not going to kill, but it's the intention of using the knife, what purpose you're going to be using it for. So again, when we actually talk about assisted dying, there are a couple of things we have to be very careful of. And that is, if the doctors are going to intervene and actually help that person finish their life a little bit earlier than expected, there is a karmic result for both. Right? One, the person who's going to be dying, they have actually cut their journey short, and because Hinduism believes in reincarnation, that means that karma is not completed. You'll have to complete it in future lives, sometime. The doctor's intention, they are also getting their karmas because they have probably, the intention is right because they're trying to put the person out of misery and the pain, but it is still getting its karma because they are also doing something they wouldn't have been doing if that person was not going to be dying or hasn't asked to be saying, can you help me die? So there is a karmic relationship between both, and that is something that both the doctors and the person would have to make up their own mind. I totally understand where they say that the family does suffer and it goes through a lot of pain, but life is full of suffering and pain. That is the purpose of life, that you don't just have the goods, you have the ups and the downs, and you have to actually go through it to experience it, to actually progress spiritually onto the next stage, whatever stage that you have. Now in Hinduism we have 4 stages for each life. So you have the first, if I tell you these names it's going to mean nothing to you, but the first 25 years is a student life. So you know you're studious, you're going to go and do all your wonderful joys and enjoy life and think absolutely brilliant. The next 25 years is when you actually decide whether you want to get married, you want to have a career, you want to have buy a house, start a family, and really become successful in whatever you want to. Then comes the next 25 years, from 50 to 75, when you really should be thinking about, do I really want to just be stuck with this material world, or do I now progress spiritually as well? And at that stage, you actually decide which way you want to go. And that's where you actually start handing over to your children or the successor all the things that you have actually sort of gained through the life. So it could be your homes, your wealth, whatever it is, but you might think, okay, I've enjoyed my life for 50 years. Now it's time to pass that on. Whatever that stage people pass it on is again very individual, but it gives you an indication. So from 51, the name, even in English, is very similar to ours. It says 51. And one for in Hinduism actually means going towards the forest dwelling. So you're supposed to leave the material world and start moving towards a really basic nomadian life and start giving up all of those wealth that you've held on to. So at that point, the person, if they feel they have completed all their desires, they don't feel attached in any way or form now to their children, the family, the wealth, the career, the wife, whatever, right? They think, I can actually leave this, even including their own body. Then they get into the next time of the life, the last life, part of life, which is called sannyas, which means you become one with the person who created you, the creator. Now, this stage, even though it gives you as a last stage, that stage can be happening at any time in your life. If you have been already spiritually progressed from a very young age, you will have that at a very young age anyway. But saying that, in Hinduism, there are scriptures which say, when you feel that you are spiritually heightened to that level, you've given up all your desires, automatically your desires to eat or drink will stop as well. And that means you are not attached to this body anymore. And that's called prayopravesha. And that means you are now, the soul is actually heightened to such a level, it's actually meeting the main soul. And when that happens, then that kind of death is actually allowed. So it says, if you feel that now you have achieved and accomplished everything you wanted in this world, you can progress towards that spirituality, become detached from this body, and it will take its natural course because you will stop eating, drinking naturally. But it also says, Hinduism says that if there is a person who's terminally ill and has very short time to live, they can allow it, but again, is it going to be an active death or a passive death? So there are two forms. Active death is when doctors would actually intervene to give you something to actually end that life quickly. Passive death would be to actually take all that medications or the life support machine away and leave it to natural way of them going. If you decided to go on the path of active, that will again cause karmic results. If you go on the passive one, you're more likely to say, this is it, because you're letting natural things happen. There is a question, and there will be, why is it then that we allow, then when an animal gets hurt, we can put it down? If you can put an animal down, why can't the same thing happen to a human being? And again, Hinduism says the reason why that is because the human beings are so much more superior progress already. You have the intelligence, you know the know-how, you know life is all about suffering. You know that you have to go through certain things. So you go through illness, you go through old age, you will go through pain, and you will go through suffering. If you know all these things, the animals don't know that. And that is why the human beings actually take that decision to say, okay, we don't want to see that. And I'll give you an example, because I actually, when I was on one of my visit to India a long time ago, we went to a pilgrimage place and I saw a cow that had actually a broken back. And it was scorching hot day. And I could see that it was very thirsty. And so I just got a vessel, I filled it up with water and took it to the cow, and the cow just lapped it up and finished it in so quickly. So I went and filled up another one and got another one, lapped that one up. And the third time I actually went and I got it, my uncle actually stopped me and says, "What are you doing?" And I says, "The cow's really thirsty, I'm giving it water." He goes, "What you're doing is you're making the suffering longer. You giving it water means that that cow is going to actually live longer. Your intention might be that it's thirsty, but you're prolonging its death, natural death." And that really stuck with me. I was a very, very young child then, but it really stuck with me. And I realized that, yes, maybe this is something that we do need to think about. So there is no one answer. Assisted dying bill is a bill, I hope, it looks like as if it's going to go ahead. But people realize that sometimes if you believe in the progression of life and life after death and reincarnations and karmic ways, all you're doing is you're just prolonging it to the next life or the next life if you complete and try and suicide or, end your life earlier. So that is all I'm going to say because there are 3 other speakers after me. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Marty.
Thank you. I think I will approach this topic from 2 different perspectives. One from a sick perspective, and 2 probably as a chaplain working in hospitals, where life and death, faith is all encountered and often a part of people's journey. Where I think I might also begin, I might just caveat this will include some of my own thoughts in this because I think it's difficult to answer such a deep topic when there are so many nuances to the perspective. I think the starting point is the assisted dying bill is a shift in the landscape. We've had palliative carers about the journey someone has in end of life and the care and support they might receive. And where we have now shifted with the assisted dying bill is the active intervention in hastening someone towards death and putting in interventions that will lead to death. And I think that this shift is quite significant because, as Barclay just mentioned now, there is one thing of stopping all interventions, do not resuscitate, we're now withdrawing all treatment and letting nature take its course, which is simply to say is we're not going to prolong life. Whereas now we are shifting to the question and thought of progressing death. And I think that there's something in that is societally and ethically and morally a significant shift that we've not seen before. And I think it's important that we ask questions and we grapple with this and what this means, not just in the short term, but the long-term implications of that and how it might affect how we understand the process of healthcare and dignity in death, and whether this is the right move forward or not. Working as a chaplain, I've been with patients who are and currently are terminal. There is no prospect from the medical profession that they will live. How long they may live or may not live is usually undetermined. The palliative care team often are vague in the words that they use when they speak about timelines, because they may, based upon the best medical evidence, make educated guesses, but someone who's given a prognosis of living 6 months may live on for another 2 years, may live on for 5 years. We don't know that. Or they may die in 2 weeks. And so there's something in the certainty of the bill around someone who will die within 6 months. With what certainty do we say that or not? I think that raises a number of questions. The second thing is, I also understand for someone who looks into their future and sees only suffering, my heart is moved by that, and having spoken with people who look into their future and all they see is a continuation of ongoing pain, horrendous physical pain, emotional pain, psychological pain, the existential distress that they might feel, the spiritual distress they might feel, that they may desire not to have to journey through that, and I might understand where they come from in those moments. But does that as a Sikh lead me to the answer of, well, let us allow people to hasten death and let us facilitate that? I think from a karmic perspective, there is something of the actions and consequences that one might have. And again, I don't speak with any level of what judgment or not, because I don't think that's for me to say, or how we might ascribe the sense of what is the karma of doing so. But I imagine there's something in the taking of your own life that has an internal consequence as well as a spiritual consequence. And for those who might commit to that process, in enabling that to happen or facilitating that, how they too may be impacted by the process. It's not just the person who commits the act, it's maybe the people who are also involved in the process. And what moral injury or sense of psychological harm they may feel in the process. And whilst there may be provisions to navigate that, how do we give our self-assurance about how this might function? Gurbani teaches very much the sanctity of life. Life is precious. Manas John Lumbeheads is a precious gift that we've been given. And we must make best endeavours to preserve and flourish and fulfill this life to its full potential. And are we accepting then that someone who is facing a terminal illness has nothing left to live for? Do we know that in those 6 months that we may imagine they may live or not, that there are moments that maybe they go through with their family or loved ones that they would think back and say, actually, I'm glad I had those moments. And again, we grapple with the unknowns here. And Gurbani teaches us that compassion in life isn't necessarily about hastening someone towards death, it's understanding suffering. Because suffering, in the frameworks, it talks about someone having capacity, making the conscious decision that they want to end their lives. But what is behind that thought? Is there a sense of loss of dignity, loss of worth, being a burden on anyone? I hear it from a number of elders. I don't want to be a burden on my children, my loved ones, my families. That is the greater fear that they may grapple with. And for them, that sense of indignity of not being able to be the parent anymore or have full control over their body may be a sense of shame that they feel, and it's internalized, and maybe I'm better off dead. And maybe I'm a burden on my families if I continue to live. Maybe I'm being selfish in the process. And I think that this bill doesn't really grapple with those conversations. And speaking as a chaplain, I would say that if this bill passes, when it passes, I would want chaplains to be a part of the conversation, to be alongside individuals who may want to grapple with that conversation, so that we may sit alongside them with a sense of understanding. Well, what is it that you're wanting? And not to take it lightly, safeguarding is a huge thing in hospitals. We all have a responsibility for it. And whilst in my experience as a chaplain, I have come across safeguarding concerns where pressure and coercion was put on elderly and vulnerable patients. And I imagine to myself the risk that exists, and maybe not overtly, but covertly and subtly, the pressure that may be put on an individual to make them feel that their life isn't worth living, or they're not wanted anymore, and that they are a burden, and whether that might influence someone's decisions for how they feel about themselves. And again, I'm only going into the possibilities, because each individual is an individual, each person has their own choice and may look at it differently. And maybe if I was in this position, maybe I would look at life differently. Who can say? But I think there's something in that market shift and the emphasis that we place then on what it means to have a dignified life and a dignified death. And whether assisting someone in dying is the answer to that. Now, in that, the response to suffering is about compassion and care for the person who's going through it. How do we support them? How do we come alongside them and offer them that care and support? And does it actually look like, well, here, let us take you on a process that will end your life, because that will mean the end of your suffering? And are we then finalizing our understanding on what we mean by the value of someone's life who is terminally ill? That it's not, is it no longer valuable? Maybe it's not valuable enough for it to be preserved, and maybe we are encouraging people towards death just by the implication of enabling assisted dying. What are we saying as a society? Now, informed choice is a difficult question in my mind as well. I remember having a conversation about this some months ago, and someone said, well, if you are experiencing spiritual distress and facing an existential crisis, are you of sound mind? Or are you so consumed by the suffering and anxiety and fear and pain and distress that that in itself is shaping your thoughts in the moment? Who can answer that question quite simply? I struggle to be able to speak with certainty on that. And Sikhi challenges us to not act with certainty on that which is uncertain, that which is not known for us. And thereby we might be guided by the principles of life is precious, life is sacred. We show compassion and dignity to all people, we serve all people as best as we can, and life will unfold as it is meant to. And maybe there is something in those moments of suffering, that there is something in there that is a gift. I spoke with a family only last week who their loved one, their son, died suddenly, unexpectedly. And they're grappling with the questions around, did he suffer? What do we know? What happens from a spiritual sense? But also all of the unanswered questions that remain. And I think by enabling assisted dying, maybe we open that door of denying the potential of many moments, whether they are good or bad, how we might ascribe labels to them, whether it's suffering or joy. Maybe it's not precious in that time. Maybe we lose some of that by enabling an irreversible decision to be made. I think also alongside this, I think about my staff and the colleagues that might work in hospital and the impact this might have on them, who might be alongside patients. And I can speak openly because I know so many staff will be affected by the death of a patient. And particularly if someone's been on the ward for a long time, they become a part of the family of the ward. And when that person dies, there is an injury that is carried out by a member of staff. And I wonder whether vicariously, through the process of being alongside someone who is making that decision to end their life, what moral injury and harm may be inflicted upon the members of staff who may not be involved in the process, but were involved in the care and lament the loss of this person and the potential of life that they may or may not have had. I'm going to probably stop there because I think that I'll give my colleagues something to say. But I think it's complex, and whilst Sikhi would teach us that we approach life with an acceptance of the way that life is, and even that is in suffering. Suffering is not considered bad. It is an integral aspect of life. I too can't deny that I've seen people face death and immense suffering, and I can understand why they may want to end their life. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Cllr, and it's also a very useful perspective because, as mentioned earlier, Cllr leads the chaplaincy service at the University Hospital Leicester, and they do a great, wonderful job as well. So that perspective is very valuable, and I'm sure we'll have good discussions around question and answer sessions about some of those perspectives. Right, I'm going to ask Leon to take the mantle now.
Well, thank you, Fayez, and thank you to Barty and Qatar for what you've said so far. I'm sure what Suleiman will say will be equally deep and profound. First of all, I think it's really important to address this question, and we don't talk about death enough, and yet it's the one thing that is inevitable for all of us. My sister-in-law's mum passed away on Monday, so yesterday. It feels a long time ago, but it was yesterday. And so this is kind of in memory of her and her spirit, which is floating at the moment, and will settle soon. Judaism also teaches about how precious life is, and it is a gift from God, and it is clearly, not to be destroyed or taken away, either by another person or by yourself. And that's the fundamental position. But equally, as time has moved on and as we live in a different sort of society, many rabbis are starting to question that in terms of looking at their experience of supporting people who are going through terminal illness and that immense distress that causes, and seeing the pain and suffering with the only solution being an eventual death. So I'm coming from it from a perspective of giving people the opportunity to make that choice for themselves. I may have a view, we all may have a view about what would be right for us and our family, but does that give me the right to say what should be the choice for somebody else who may not have my faith or my background? So the understanding is that this bill will give people the option, not the compulsion, but the option to make an informed and considered decision. And it's not done in haste, it's done over a period of time. It needs to be a written decision that they've made. It needs to be checked by 2 doctors at different times, independent from each other. And then there are safeguards in terms of looking at a multidisciplinary committee that will check that there is no coercion. Clearly, it's something that is complicated, but we already have the right to refuse treatment. We already have a number of interventions that we make in the medical field. So at some point we need to wrestle with these sort of questions. And the decisions that doctors make in palliative care on a day-to-day basis are really tough. And they're tough already. It would equally be tough if this came into place. Currently, people can have assisted dying. They just need to have the money to go to Switzerland. So currently we have a situation in this country where those that can afford it can do it without the safeguards, but those that are poor actually do not have that choice. It's taken away from them. So one of the arguments in favour of this is that of equality. And it's within the framework of English and Welsh law rather than Swiss law, for example. It's also the case that it's happening in other countries as well, and we can learn from the examples of other countries. The Netherlands, Switzerland, Australia. They all have some form of assisted dying or supported dying, and it's interesting to learn from those. We've not seen in those situations a great big demand that it increases. There's a certain number of people who want to do it, but it's a choice. So it's not seen that evidence of that coercion implying large numbers of people are being forced into that decision by family. Clearly there are lots of really important issues to discuss, and I think so many of Qatar's points are really valuable, and the pressure that somebody might feel And is their choice genuinely their choice? It clearly needs to be tested. But there's also the opportunity we have, the idea in Judaism is that God gave us life, but he also gave us choice in how to lead our life, whether to do it righteously or not. Who to marry, who to love, that is our choice. Should it not also be our choice in how and when to die? So I'll leave it there. The bill gives the option to people to take this choice if they wish to do it, with safeguards. Who am I to say I'll deny that choice to somebody else? Thank you.
Most difficult part of being last is everything you've heard. First of all, I want to thank Fayaz, Leicester Council of Faiths, for putting this program together. We very often don't want to speak about thorny subjects. We like to always walk on eggshells, and sometimes I think we need to be honest and grapple with those difficult things that we're facing in the community. I'm sorry for anything that I would say or anybody has said here that brings back memories to anybody sitting out there who has recently lost a loved one or has seen suffering to that extent, and they're reliving that trauma. Simply by this conversation can ignite that in themselves. I thought of making notes and writing because I have actually contributed to the government writing, but then I thought possibly just speak off the cuff. And the reason for that is not because I have the necessary knowledge of it, but I've been involved in death and bereavement for at least 3 decades, running a charity around this issue. And I have contributed to a number of consultations with government. And I personally feel there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. And I say this not as a Muslim, but as a fellow human being. As a Muslim, I have a point of view, from the Islamic point of view. But as in common humanity, for any of us who has not seen or experienced the suffering of a loved one, we can try and understand that they may be going through a hell of a troubled time. So who are we, able bodies, sitting around here, giving people choices? The difficulty I think arises with each and every one of us is this. Each and every one of us, I don't really think has a particular point of view, except the point of view of the family that we were born in. So, besides those that are converts or reverts to a particular faith, the vast majority of people in this room, if you belong to a faith community, it's a faith you've picked up from your parents, from your siblings, from your family. So you were born, example, in a Hindu home, and you were born in a Jewish home, Muslim home, a Sikh home. Isn't it funny that we never had a choice in that? We just were born there, in that family, and we took the norms of that society, and we spent the rest of our lives defending something that we never had a choice in the beginning. And we always think, I have the absolute truth because that is what's been taught to me by my family. So I think we need to be a bit careful when we discuss issues of this nature and think slightly outside the box. Personally, I think, on a personal level, I am in disagreement with the bill. And I'll tell you why. First of all, what drives my thinking is my faith. If you look at the world's majority faiths, possibly Judaism comes closer in relation to a law-based faith. Islam is a totally law-based faith. Everything we do, from the way you eat, to sleep, to constitutional law, to everything you do, there's a Sharia law, there's a complete. So we know basically 3 law systems. One has to do with tribal law, which we won't talk about. We know Roman law, so we have British law modeled around that. We have Scottish law that's modeled around that. and we have the Islamic Sharia law that covers the whole aspect, and it's developing, and it has developed 200 or 300 years after the demise of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and it's continuing to move as we're going forward, because there are things that happens now that 1400 years ago the science was not available. Example, organ donation. What does Islam say about organ donation? Well, the science wasn't available 1400 years ago, so you can't go to the Quran or the Hadith to say what the guidelines or overarching arguments come into it. The main principle within my faith is, because of a law-based faith, we have certain restrictions, prohibitions. Example, I'll give you one, dietary. We have the same in the Jewish community. Example, the consuming of pork is prohibited. But we are taught that, say you are in a situation where for 3 days and 3 nights you had nothing to eat, and the only thing available at that point was a ham sandwich, then the law says you have to eat that ham sandwich because life supersedes any prohibition in your faith. In other words, there's nothing higher than the sacredness of life. That's the most pinnacle, the highest point we have. So if I take that argument, then we move forward as to why we believe that the choice is not of an individual. For Muslims, and I'm sure the other faiths believe very similar, that it is God who gives life, it is God that separates life. Now the difficulty with this word death, I found in relation to a consultation I did with the European Union and the House of Lords in relation to should we give organs or should we not give organs. And you know, in this country you used to carry an organ donor card if you consented to it. Wales went the opposite way. Now you consent, or you don't consent, it's automatic now. So if you do not refuse the organ to be given, you have automatically consented. That is the rule, that is the law. Is that law implemented? No, it's not. Because when you're in the hospital and your loved one is nearing death and you talk about harvesting the organs, and if family members object, despite the fact that you said you agreed or disagreed, that will overrule it. And one of the reasons for this is, I'm not a lawyer, but within British law, does a person who's passed away have any legal rights or not, or do the legal rights end at that point? The second part is death. What is death? Well, many years ago, and from the chaplain department, you may have your view on this, when the respiratory system shut down, we said the person is not breathing and therefore has passed away. We later moved on and says if there is no heartbeat, the person has passed away. Recently, what they call stem cell death, oxygen supply to the brain has been cut off, death has taken place. Now, in relation to organ donation, the problem is this. At what point do you harvest the organs? Is it that your apparatus said the person's passed away and you're removing the organs, so does it fall into murder, or is it life-saving by removing the organs? So we have to now look at it even wider. I think personally, the care that the chaplaincy department does, I work with Laurels and Rainbows. In fact, I'm drawing up one of the toolkits for end-of-life care at the moment as we speak. We need a more holistic approach to this issue of death. We normally see death in a very clinical sense. It's cold, it's clinical. We speak to the patient and we talk about increasing pain control, example, medication from 400 milligrams, I'll give you 600 milligrams. The person who's near death, as Bhatti says, their mind has already moved on from the world that we know it, because they are moving on to the next plane. For those that believe there's a life after death or incarnation, doesn't really matter, but they believe there's something beyond death, they've moved on. So do we really have the holistic approach to what death is actually before we even define death in itself? It's a major question. Now, why I know these positions change, and I keep giving you comparisons, if we look at what happened with death in relation to Harold Shipman and the 250-something people that were killed, we hear about Alder Hayes' organ retention scandal. Recently, the case going about Lucy Lakeby, a nurse involved with so many children that have allegedly been killed. The question arises, what do we do about those difficult subjects that we have not overcome yet, and we already moved on to, shall we take somebody's life? The older Hayes organ retention scandal taught us that there is no foolproof system in place. Though we like to think two medical doctors will certify it, a judge or somebody will certify it, but human error comes into it. I know where human error comes in because I work with the Home Office on the issue of counterterrorism, and I see the failure of the state, of the police, of various agencies, and there are failures also within the medical profession. I mean, we all hear horror stories, though it's once in a while where somebody's knocking on the lid of a coffin and we open it. But that's very rare. It doesn't happen that often, thank goodness for that. But it does happen when somebody is in an induced deep coma, then of course life is not extinct yet. And what is life itself? It's not a question itself, it's very philosophical in its sense. You know, when does consciousness leave us? And whether we have that will, or is it the will of a superior being? And it's a subject that I'm trying to research at the moment, and I'm telling you, I wish I never started it, because my faith teaches us that we have free will, but then I question this argument, free will up to an extent. No human has total free will. I could be sitting on this chair right now and wanted to use the loo, and I exercise my free will that I will not go to the loo. The law of nature will take over. So your will is not within your control. We think we have the free will to choose what we want, but do we really have total will? And is that will interrupted during time of stress, times of illness, the word you use, burden? Are you making a person feel that they're going to be a burden to society? And I think society needs to change and look at those, certainly among the elders in our community, our parents, people who gave us protection as a child growing up. And as you become older, you become more childlike in your approach. You forget things and you do things wrong. Is it not better to create a caring society to say that your parents or your elders have reached a certain point in life? It's your job now as a younger person to look after, to care for the elder person, as opposed to being a burden, like you said, a lot feeling like a burden. And why should we make them feel that we're a burden? They are our kin, they are our blood, and it's our duty to look after them. So looking from that point of view, I think it's still premature. I think they've rushed through with this. There may be a time when we can discuss this, and I'm not saying which way it should go, because people have the personal choice, as you've said. Those that we should choose it can choose it, those that don't. But it's a slippery slope if we are not careful that we can go down. Could it be, and I've had situations, I don't want to give names, but there are individuals sometimes who have passed away, have been buried. You need Home Office approval to the body to take that from the ground again, because foul play has been suspected, and then seeing that there are people who have tried to claim insurance and have killed off somebody else. So in my line of work, I've seen so many things that people do not normally think about. Foul play. There's another issue around cause of death. Two people, and this is a case that happened in Leicester, a car going down the road, had a road traffic accident, hit a tree, and they checked the driver to see whether the driver was under the influence of drink or drugs, and what was the cause of the accident. But as the pathologist looked deeper, they came to realize that the passenger on the seat was actually murdered, put in the car, driver drove down the road, panicked, hit a tree, killed himself. So to the bystander, both have died as a result of a road traffic accident, where one was foul play and one wasn't. So we need to understand, yes, there are certain difficulties that we have no answers to, and I hate to see something to learn from those experiences. I'd rather have safeguards in place. The issue around old age organ retention scandal was exactly the same. Babies' bodies, and I'm sorry if this is hurtful, were cut out. They removed organs. Organs were not put back again. The body was given to the family, therefore they had a full body, but they all had part. It was either cremated or buried, and later on found out that the organs were held in some laboratory, and the tissue retention legislation came in. So our argument with government was, and I can remember that, why can't we find an alternative way of determining cause of death? And this why it relates to this argument, why can't we look at alternatives? Why is it only this or nothing? So government then decided at that point that they'll try what they call virtual autopsy, MRI CT scanning, to put a body through a scanning machine, and that would give us some sort of result as to how the person passed away. And initially the idea was to do it in Wales, and my argument was I wasn't aware that a lot of sheep needed a cause of death certificate. Why not do bring it to Leicester? And they brought it to Leicester because we've got a right-sized community made up of Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, Muslims, enough to deal with this. Work with the University of Leicester with the senior pathologist and the Leicester Royal Infirmary. We did a 6 months trials in Leicester, and now we've hit something like 94% success rate through a scanning process to determine cause of death. Of course, it'll never be 100% because some are bloodborne, airborne diseases, etc. We leave all of that out. What I'm trying to illustrate here is, as science is progressing and new treatments are coming forward, there may be a better way to deal with that person with the struggling and the suffering that they have. It could be that there could be new drugs on the market. You could possibly make their life a bit more comfortable. So why should we always rush, and I hate using this word, but get rid of that person? It's a loved ones that we have. Now, of course, people have a choice. I accept that. But sometimes choices are not necessarily the best ideas in all circumstances. They are in most, but not in all. So I am of an opinion that better care, better hospices, better time spent with chaplaincy and looking at the whole holistic approach to death, as opposed to just the physical part that the person is suffering from. Also, mental health is an increase, and more people could be coerced into doing so. And there's other safeguards that are not in place anyway, in my opinion. We don't go through all of them at this stage. So I am of an opinion that possibly I think we are rushing very quickly with this particular piece of legislation. I understand that people suffer. I understand it's hard to see your loved ones suffer, so I'm not taking that away. But despite that, I still think love, care is better for the human being as an alternative to simply say, let's give him an injection and end their life. I think I'll stop there because I'm sure questions and answers section will come up anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that and thank you everyone for all the panel members for speaking so eloquently and passionately about the subject. There are obviously mentioned concerns around people who will actually be at the forefront of actually dealing with these requests, if they are approved, which is the doctors, and the uncertainty and the people who are very uncomfortable about actually undertaking that task. That is something that's also something to consider. But I think the point mentioned about burden is the view that, when you have generations, so you have family members, children, grandchildren, like in my faith as well, in the Islamic faith, like in many other cultures and faiths, the care that you give to your vulnerable parent or vulnerable grandparent is actually part of your duty, and not just as a faith duty, but as a human being as well. Just as how your parents or your grandparents cared for you when you were vulnerable, you would care for them when they're vulnerable. So it's an opportunity for the family members to provide that service to their parents or grandparents, and I think there's an element to it, and this is where the issue of burden was talked about as well. So very interesting sort of discussion. But I think I want to open it up to the floor. If you have any questions or any particular comments from your faith perspective, that's not mentioned, then please do that. So I just want this to be a very engaging discussion. So it's as I said, it's a very difficult subject, complex matter. People have views influenced by their personal experiences, influenced by their faith perspective, but also we've heard the different diverse perspectives around here as well. So any questions, comments, any kind of contributions that members on the floor want to make? Yes.
Not a question, more a poorly thought through comment, probably. There was quite a bit of mention of suffering, and I'm sure it's not uncommon or unknown in all of our faith communities for suffering to be one of the reasons why people end up questioning their faith or even leaving it entirely. And so I absolutely welcome the comments on that we should take it more seriously as part of life and part of faith communities, people's personal journey. When I have a headache, I take a paracetamol and I relieve that suffering. I've got gout and I'm unable to walk if I get an attack, and so I take medication to relieve that suffering. You mentioned palliative care, and a couple of people made it clear that people in palliative care are put on pain relief programs to relieve their physical suffering. We seem to be quite comfortable with relieving physical suffering, people's physical pain. And then, what am I trying to say? But then it's much harder to relieve the spiritual, the emotional, the mental distress. It's much harder to find ways of relieving that often. And I think when we talk about suffering as being part of somebody's journey through life, and I don't intend to say that anyone did this, I don't think you did, but not to glamorize suffering or make it into a virtue is probably the wrong word. But when we're quite happy to relieve our minor suffering, to then tell someone that they should be prepared to suffer themselves, I find very a difficult thing to think through. But like many of you said, I'm entirely conflicted on this topic. But that's a thought that came to mind.
Sorry, just come on this issue about suffering. It's our interpretation of suffering. Now, if my children and grandchildren were here, and what they regard as suffering, I don't mean medical, but what they call suffering, is their Wi-Fi goes off for 1 hour. And I talk about my idea of suffering at my age. Okay, there he takes the violin and he's playing the violin again, saying, do you know what suffering is? And I tell them stories of my parents who left the Indian subcontinent, often borrowing money on the land that they had on a long ship to Africa, no language, no money, no skill. The true pioneers that started life. Compare that suffering to my children that are dropped off in the car every day, brought back by car. They don't want to eat the traditional food that we have, then they want pizzas and pastas. There's nothing wrong with pizza and pasta as long as you don't give it to me. They think that's a problem. My grandson, when he was about 7, 8 years old, he turned to me and he says, so Granddad, you don't know anything. So I don't know anything. He seems to know. There's a generational gap that's happening. And our perception of what suffering is will also change. Yeah. There may come a time when the next younger generation, at the smallest event, will say, this is suffering, we need to move on. So are we creating and equipping them for the true world from our point of view, or are we taking suffering from a child's point of view, which will be totally different depending when they grow up? I've been to India, and not that I promote this, but sometimes there are buildings that are 10 stories high, no side walls, young Indian boys or girls playing football, no side, on the 7th, 8th floor, and I think, are they going to go over the edge anytime? And they don't go over the edge. Here, health and safety will kick in and everything else. So now, there is, without stereotyping, there is a situation I find within my own family and my extended family, that this idea that we call suffering means different things to different people at different times. And before we know before we move away from the direction of what suffering actually is, I mean, they already move and they order on Uber some kind of food. Are they going to just pick up the phone and say, yes, my dad wants to go? Let him go. I mean, that's his choice or something. Now, of course, you and I wouldn't know it. Not within this age group of people that are here. But just think yourself down 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, 40 years down the line. And I've seen the changes in the family. I've seen the changes in the traditional Asian family. Fayaz mentioned about looking after our elders.
Yeah.
Do you know that within the Asian community, South Asian, irrespective of Sikh, Muslim, it doesn't really matter. The idea of an old person's home was never
there.
considered. Never.
Carers,
It was never. It was all done by the family. Now we are also facing exactly the same crisis 20 years later, 30 years later, where we have Asian old people's home. So what I'm saying, the dial is moving. And that dial moving, if there's no stop at some point, it will move all the way across. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm just talking of my long life, as you can see from the grey hair. The differences I've seen in society and societal changes, and I'm fearful of societal changes.
Can I just make one more point?
I think there's just 2 points I'd add. One, going on from what someone might have said. I often think about the question around suicide, and I always find it particularly challenging because for me it's the thought that the person who committed suicide felt that there was no hope and there was no other option but ending their life. And I often question, have we failed that person as society, that they found no other recourse, no other hope, no other support that would mean that life had some alleviation of pain rather than ending their life. Just on the comment that was just made, I think there's something around, and again, speaking from chaplaincy services, I think that spiritual care and navigating spiritual distress and dealing with not just the physical pain and physical aspects of pain and suffering, or even some of the mental distress, because again, mental health is a whole other topic, and I could talk about psychiatry and how much it has or hasn't moved in the last 30 years in terms of medication, and whether it's about masking symptoms rather than dealing with underlying causes, or whether we know about underlying causes. I think the question, the spiritual distress question is less easily medicalized. And this is one of the interface that we navigate working within this liminal space of the medical world, the medical profession, medical models that we work under that are about treating and caring for people, the realities of life, and that space in between of a person's experience of both of those worlds. I think that there is so much more needed in expanding that spiritual care that is provided to people that isn't necessarily easy, it isn't prescriptive, but I would say it's fundamental to a person's dignity, sense of being, sense of well-being, and sense of living a fulfilled life. And I think it's more difficult because there isn't a simple formula that you perform as a chaplain. That means you do X, Y, and Z, and this is the outcome. And yet, through the journey of that spiritual encounter or existential encounter, that my non-religious colleagues in chaplaincy might say, there is a deep sense of grappling with that which can't be prescribed in the most simple medical terms. And I think there's a huge need for that. I look at mental health services 50 years ago when we did electroshock therapy and lobotomies. And we look back at that and think, crikey, what were these asylums that we once had? And our medical models have improved. I've said it after I left my previous mental health post. I imagine 50 years from now, people will look back at what we do now and think, crikey, did we really do that to people? And maybe we will develop more holistic ways of navigating that. So taking those both comments together, I think there are different ways of tackling this conversation. And my worry often is when, possibly or possibly not, I work for the NHS, I think often tough decisions are made about the care that's provided, but there's always a drive and desire to do the best for our patients and care. But I can't deny, none of us can, we live in a world where politicians may have said there is no magic money tree. And if that is sometimes influencing the options available, I question whether that is actually what is the best thing for the people that we serve, or right now it's the thing that we can kind of offer. And I imagine there is something far better, because I imagine someone who is facing the prospect of death, if you said to them, what would be the best possible care, money is no object, I imagine they might find or may think of things that they might want to continue life with, rather than say, actually. Whereas when you face that example of you are going to die in 6 months and you don't know the quality of your care, the provision that's in place, the support that is in place, all of these things, if you said to them, we will give you all of the things that you ask for, would that person make the decision or not? That's a question to be asked. But I imagine that answer may be very different for someone who looks at this question and thinks, actually what is available to me doesn't look great. And rather than that, and I'll give an example. I had an elderly Sikh lady who was not making the progress that she should have been making. And one of the consultants called the chaplaincy and said, can someone just come and speak to her? And I identified 3 things from my conversation with one. One, no one could speak to her in Punjabi, and so she was struggling. She's in a foreign environment with no one to talk to. Her 2 sons live in London. She misses them. She isn't able to speak to her loved ones. And thirdly, she didn't like food. Now, we have a fantastic selection of food in the hospital. I'm not bigging them up, but actually they've worked really hard to try and get a good spectrum of flavor profiles. We've got someone who can speak to Punjabi on a regular basis. I said, we can FaceTime the sons. We have tablets on the walls to facilitate that. We can get her the food that she likes and someone to talk to. And we see a shift. Now think about it. She said to me, she goes, as in, if I'm going to live like this, with no one to talk to, with food I don't like, my loved ones nowhere in sight, why do I want to carry on like this? And I use that as a simple, real example of what I might imagine someone who faces the prospect of death with all the bleak responses. And I think there is a real question for communities now about the care that we provide to our families and our elders. And that has been one of the most painful things I've seen in the hospital, where an elderly parent said, can't you talk to my son? I just want to go home. And I, as a chaplain, have professional boundaries. I can't do that. It's not my place to do that. But I understand the distress that a person goes through. I don't want anything. I just want to go home. Don't send me to this foreign home. That person would rather live in their home and maybe may not want to live in this foreign space.
Thank you for that. Just before I ask Barty to come in, I just want to throw one thing out as well, for perhaps a question might come out from here or response. When you look at historically, when adherence to faith or faith, the following of faith was stronger and much more, let's say, orthodox, or maybe in line with more scripture, and sanctity of human life was regarded more than what it is in terms of and faith, how faith is weakened in terms of how people follow it. Do you think that it is a bit of a failure of faith communities of not promoting the teachings of faith, and as a result of which society and generally the politicians then adopt these kind of approaches where people take the easy option? So what role has faith, or do you think communities or the weakening of following of faith, or how's that played, or can that be changed by having better faith education, spiritual education, all those things? Just something out there before I ask.
There's a couple of people I think wanted to speak.
Let's Barty come in and then we'll get our question.
I just wanted to say that sometimes when people, when you talk about suffering, they think of it as permanent, and it isn't. I mean, it can be, but it isn't usually. But when they are in that suffering mode, I think that's when the decisions that they take are not always correct, because they're going through so much. Again, when you've had sort of a big major operations and things like that, and you think you've actually done yourself good because you've had an operation that's supposed to heal you, but straight after the operation, you just absolutely think, why the hell have I gone through this? And I wish I hadn't, because all of a sudden your body can't move, you can't do anything, and you think, it's probably the worst decision I've done to try and improve myself, but in fact it's gone the other way. So suffering is probably the worst time that somebody can make a decision that is positive. And so all I'm saying is suffering is something nobody can avoid. And it's not there to be glorified or think, yes, it's a part. But we do need to talk about these things, that yes, it can come, but it can also pass. And as Cllr said, if you've got the right understanding on why that person is sometimes going through what they're going through, then there are solutions sometimes which actually can move them out of that position into a positive one again. That's what I'll say.
Thank you for that. Steve,
Yes, thank you very much. I do rather feel that in the case of the assisted dying bill, the people who seem to be pushing it the most are people who have no faith at all, who just regard life when we die, that's the end. And you've alluded to that point, Bias. And in terms of my own denomination, the Methodist Church, yes, we have a tradition of old people's homes, and I have to declare an interest. My 98-year-old mother is in an old people's home, Abel Methodist Association on Manor Road, just over the city boundary in Oban. And it is important that we care for the elderly people. We 60 years ago, we would sort of, as a family, go to the events they organised and help with them, knowing that one day there's a possibility that one of the parents might end up there. My father died 14 years ago, my mother's there at the moment. I told the carers there, the younger ones, that in 30 years' time, it could be me then looking after those that will be still working there. It is certainly a Methodist Church tradition and something which I hope that those of you face a new concept for Asians that are in this country, because it didn't exist. Well, I hope you can sort of learn of it. I'm opposed to the assisted dying bill. I hope it does not get through. I have to say it myself. I think it might not. I have a feeling it might not. My own MP voted against it. I was very pleased to know that. But yes, it is a very important discussion and debate. It's certainly worth having time to talk as members of different faiths, different denominations within particular faiths, as we Christians refer to as ourselves. And realistically, and I have no problems whatsoever about me being still handled after my mother. I hope that she will be there for a long time, because I intend to be here for a long time to look after her and support her. So thank you for letting me apply.
Janet, sorry.
Yes, thank you. I just got two things. Carter, I don't know if you heard Sarah Mullally on the radio recently. She's currently Bishop of London, but she will shortly be Archbishop of Canterbury. And she used to be chief nurse, and is Dame Sarah Mullally as a result. She was saying that she is opposing the bill because she thinks that it should be more investment in palliative care. And I wondered if you feel there, particularly with the impact on hospices at the moment, whether that's a major consideration with the bill. And the other point I wanted to make, and Yvonne, you referred to other countries' approaches to assisted dying, and this is now active in Holland, in the Netherlands. I did hear the other day that actually there's been much more than was expected in terms of requests for assisted dying in the Netherlands. Was that part of your research or not?
That was certainly part of my research, that it increased, but there's always learning about what the scope was, and I think the learning for that is to really carefully define. Qatar touched upon a point about, terminal illness, what's the length, and how do you define that, and what the safeguards are in terms of the steps and the process. So, but what's interesting is in other countries, the number of people that have requested it has generally levelled off. So it's not been something where it's been.
And that has now leveled
Yeah,
off.
it's levelled off. Yeah.
Oh right.
So there is, and there's opportunities there for us to learn what works and what doesn't work.
Sorry, just on that, I think we're a different society, but there have been the odd cases where very young people who are quite well. Recently, I read about a case of a woman was going to go abroad to take her life. A very well person, and another couple who decided they were going to end their lives and wrote a letter to their family, who only found out later on. So, the safeguards are really, really important.
Yeah,
I say, I hope as British society we're different.
And potentially if people are going abroad to do that, that's without any safeguards, without any knowledge of their family. Whereas if it was within England and Wales, which is where it applies for this proposed bill, there would be safeguards in place and checks and balances.
Sometimes I think the issue about
Sorry, just want to get other contributions in.
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
Angela and then Minu.
Yeah, I find this a bit difficult because I'm talking from my own experience. I wonder how realistic this bill is in terms of the fact that it has safeguards in means that must be quite a long, complicated process. And in the real world, often things are much quicker than that. And if I give you the example of my father, who sought medical advice, I think, very late, and was so late diagnosed with cancer. This was 45 years ago, before there were scans and things, so that didn't come into it. But they gave him what was called an exploratory operation to find out what was wrong with it. And he actually died about 3 weeks after the operation. But when they did identify what it was, they didn't actually tell me. They never used the word cancer because there was this mystery around it. But I think he realised he was dying about 10 days before he did. And the last week of his life, he was in extreme pain. He had very high doses of morphine, as a result of which he was hallucinating. And he was bringing back memories of when he was in the Second World War and things he'd seen, and he thought he was being tortured. Now, I'm quite convinced that the compassionate thing would have been to have some medical intervention about a week before he died. Now, I don't see that happening in terms of this bill at all. I mean, do you have any reactions to how can you deal with the real world when things often happen quickly?
Minu and then Lady behind it, yes.
What we have left out, obviously I can understand, because I was a psychiatric nurse, and there was one issue about suicide. Often it proved that if you were with this person, had communication, and just didn't leave that person alone, they changed their mind. And also the power of prayer, because we are all here people of faith. When you are suffering, you turn to a higher power, to God, to pray to. There are so many prayers about healing. But I think it comes to caring and nursing and also listening to the person. Those memories that are very negative have to come out. They have to be expressed. And of course, people have to have time and everything. And often you find people who want to go. I have great respect for any idea, but they have no belief. Often they don't believe. And I feel the power of faith and prayers is great. And also the care of relatives, and also the people who are nursing and not relative, to the last minute. It will help the person not to decide, because I know that there was one person who was dying, not actually mentally ill, wonderful person, And he was a person of faith, and when he wanted to go because he was suffering, as UN mentioned before, but he was never left. There was always somebody with him, and at the end he went peacefully without that. So I have very doubtful feeling about this bill going through, which is I think it will be very hard for many people to allow their loved ones to go, So that's what I wanted to say.
That's right, thank you for that. I'll take one more contribution from there, because we're just short of time, so just for the lady there.
I'm sorry, maybe Angela said it, but I belong to a faith community that on the whole is very much behind assisted dying, and in fact Cllr MPs have tried to get through similar bills in the past, so I'm very much in favour of the bill, and I do think it's the reality of things. So just to say, as an older woman, if I get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer tomorrow, I will not have the chemotherapy or the radiotherapy, because I don't want to waste whatever time there is having those sorts of interventions. In a few weeks or months, I will painfully go, leave. I would like the opportunity of maybe leaving a few weeks before, not to have to go absolutely through to the bitter end, because I know that I'm going and I'm ready to go. And basically we need more. We need to be able to discuss death and our respect forms and all of that much more.
Thank you for that contribution. Just one last one, and then we'll just wrap it up if that's okay. Yeah.
Just a couple of things from our own family experience. I mean, one is my mother had diagnosis of cancer with 5 months to live, so she was given a time scale. I think the point about time scale is absolutely right, because I had a friend who had a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer, and she lived for 5 years. So. And they told her she'd had one. So, that's really difficult. But my mum chose not to have chemotherapy and stuff like that because she didn't want to drag my dad a 60-mile round trip several times a week, so that she could have 2 more weeks to live. So I think the point about prolonging suffering is a really important one. The second is about my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, who died in 2006. She had a genetically inherited disease, 1 in 13 million, really bad luck, really. Degenerative, she lost her balance, her speech, her ability to walk, her ability to think, and everything else. And part of that was having to be tube fed, eventually, because she kept getting chest infections, which she then kept getting. And when she got the 3rd chest infection and was admitted to hospital, after a couple of weeks, the doctors turned to my parents and said, the kindest thing would be to let her go. So I think the point and they did, they looked after her for 26 years alongside both my grandfathers at the same time. It was a big burden on them, but they didn't see that she had any future, that she was likely to die. But the doctors are already making decisions, and have done for decades, that was 2006, around early death of people. And what this bill, I think, is doing is formalising some of that to have people have more of a choice around that. I don't think my sister had any choice around that because she didn't know how to think, she didn't have capacity. And I don't know what I think about the decision my parents took. If I had to take it, I don't think I could do that. But my parents did. So I don't know what I want to offer through these stories other than the fact that it's so complex, which I think all of our speakers in a way have really reflected on that it isn't straightforward and it's difficult, and legal stuff just tries to make everything so black and white, and it isn't. I think we will still be left, whether this goes through or not, with all these difficult questions at a family level.
Thank you very much for that, and we really do appreciate the time you've taken to share your personal stories, and can understand and appreciate some of them might be a difficult story as well, but thank you for sharing that with us. Because we're out of time, I'm just going to ask sort of a 60-second wrap-up of each of the panel members in response to what you've heard. Please, if you can do 60 seconds, that'd be great. So, who wants to have to go?
Thank you. I was last, I'll start first. First of all, the lady in the back, I can understand where you've come from in relation to an illness, the disability system. I can give, it's not a counter argument, but a counter example. My brother, who was the fourth one down the line, we are 5 brothers, gave birth to a son. Everything was okay. He went on holiday to South Africa, and then all of a sudden he collapsed, and they found that there's a particular chemical in the brain that is missing, and as a result, he will not survive. And he's 26 years old now. Against all odds, he's 26 years old. He's fed through a tube, through a machine. He does not speak. Of course, there's no quality of life. He understands, and his father has left his job and has dedicated 26 years of his life to his son. So there are those examples, number one. Number two, when we talk about spirituality, as a practicing Muslim, I can understand that faith brings a lot of comfort and has a lot of answers to our challenges. But faith alone is not the silver bullet. I'll turn it on its head slightly, not in my case, but I'll turn it on its head. We have heard of cases where people belong to so-called religious cults, and there's mass suicide and people killing themselves. So religion can be an agent for good, but can also be an agent for something bad. So we have to be careful not to think that religion itself, our religion might serve us well, but there are other new faiths coming in. We heard about what happened in the United States, where they believed the world was ending and masses committed suicide. So religion can be an agent for bad as well. So we have to be very careful when we put everything. I think the answer lies somewhere in between. We need faith for our spiritual. We need the medical intervention, and I think doctors and faith practitioners should sit together and discuss these issues, because we have a medical point of view and a religious point of view, and let's not just have one versus the other, rather complement it, I think.
Thank you. Let's go next. Leon, do you want?
It's been a great discussion. I'm so pleased that we chose this topic.
Yeah.
And it is immensely personal for all of us, and complex, and wrestling medical ethics with religion, with identity, with choice, with prayer. So I come back to what's right for me may not be right for somebody else, and offering that person that choice rather than denying them that choice. And we all know we will die. What we don't know is how that will be or when that will be. And if I had the choice, I would try to choose a good death for myself and for those I love, rather than a painful death.
Thank you. Barty?
All I would like to say is faith does give you options and it gives you guidelines. At the end of the day, it is still very much an individual option and a choice of how you wish to progress with the conditions and the things that you're going through. And that is a choice, but it also should not be a way that is just simply chosen to make it easier. Because by making that easy choice, if you actually were given the opportunity to look back, you might actually say, I made that decision in haste. And that is something we should all be aware of and say, just give it a little bit more time, reflect, and it may give you another option. So faith does give you that sort of guidelines, but at the end of the day, medicine has a role to play. But even more than that, I think each and every one of us and the community has a larger, bigger role as a whole community to play. Stop there.
And I think just as a final point, there was a few comments that came in. I think there's a huge need to, again, it's about choice, but it's about what is the choices on offer. And I would say that the provision of palliative care doesn't just mean imminently you are dying, it's about the journey towards death. And that may take a longer period, and actually a greater investment in that. We look at our hospices and that provision. I think there is a whole world of growth that is needed in that space. And I don't look at religion and belief being in conflict with the medical profession. I think there are, it's one of the lectures I give at the hospital, it's some spiritual aspects of person-centered care. That there are spiritual dimensions to our care, as well as our mental, our physical, our sociological, that need to be considered when we're looking at a person as a whole. And I think there is a need for us to really grapple with this conversation around what we consider to be the best quality of medical care that we provide in our society, and how does that encompass all aspects of a person's being, including their spiritual. In terms of the question, and I wholly agree, I don't think there's a simple answer to it, because we're all individuals, life is complex, and we will all see the world through the lenses in which we understand and interpret it. I think underlying that is that sense of what do we consider to be the compassion with which we treat life and give people dignity in life and death. And no doubt the debate will continue, but I think it's important that we speak up. One of the things that we do each year is Dying Matters Week, because actually giving space to people to talk about difficult conversations and offering a space where they have the language to talk about it, I think is incredibly important. And I'll say this from chaplaincy services. We talked about that religion can be a force for good and it can be a force for evil, let's put it that way. Chaplains, one of the things that I take great pride in is the fact that we have robust processes to make sure that those people providing spiritual care actually understand the difference between those two worlds, including our non-religious chaplains, because actually people's spiritual care, it's not simply access it in the community, because we don't know who's in the community and who's actually our vulnerable patients. It's making sure that our NHS, our healthcare institutions provide the best possible care in every aspect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think if you just give a round of applause to our in conclusion, I think we can conclude that this is a complex subject, a lot of different perspectives. Faith has a role to play, faith communities have a role to play, societies have a role to play, and obviously the medical profession is right in the middle of it, which all have to work together in a complementary way to provide the solutions so that people feel that the options are actually more relevant to them. I think there's probably more opportunities for the Council of Faiths perhaps to follow up on this, perhaps supporting the wonderful work done by the chaplaincy service, and perhaps looking at some dialogue through there and for having those difficult conversations about death. I think that's something that we need to follow up going forward. But I'd like to thank everybody who's attended today, everybody who's helped in organising today's event, and once again, big thank you to Leon and the team here, and to the Neve Shalom Synagogue for allowing us to host this wonderful event at this wonderful venue. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much.